Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to this new Upside Strength live event. I hope everybody hears me okay. Evan, if you can just join the chat on the live on Instagram. That way I can add you to the live if you're not there already. Again, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Evan, you hear me all right?
Yep, I could hear you fine.
Okay, fantastic. Can you join the live on Instagram? That way I can get that started. Moxie Monitor has joined, so that's awesome. Hey, Moxie, how you doing? Dan has joined there as well. Let me know when you're on the live on Instagram, Evan, and then we can get this party started here.
I'm trying to figure out how to join the live.
If you go to my profile, the Upside Strength page, then you should be able to join from there. No problem. For everybody who is just joining us now, thanks a lot. We're doing this little live Q&A today, special live Q&A with Evan Peikon. Moxie just announced last week they announced the beginning of the Kickstarter to fund the Moxy Portal, which is going to be an app, a data cloud, and a web tool in order to read and utilize. Here we go. View requests. Go live with Evan. That should work now. Okay, we should be good on both sides, everyone. So we can kind of go from there. Fantastic. I'm just gonna have to turn the sound down here so it doesn't echo everywhere. Okay. Okay. You'll have to turn down your sound as well, Evan.
Yep.
As you probably understood.
Yeah, I'm getting a nice feedback loop here. I think we're good though.
Exactly. Okay, perfect. So welcome to everybody. We'll start up again. I don't know if you can go zero sound. I think there's always going to be a little bit of something.
Yeah, a little bit.
If it's not too close, that should work. Okay, so let's restart. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Instagram over there. Welcome, everybody on YouTube, Facebook, and any other platform. Make sure you drop us a little line in the chat to let us know where you're listening from. I'm going to put a couple links in the chat here to begin with. The first one is for anybody who might be interested in coming on and asking a question live. So you can click that link, and then I can let you come in to ask your question when the time will come. And then obviously, since we're talking about the Moxie Kickstarter, I'm going to put the link to the Kickstarter campaign. The Kickstarter is already 80% completed. The goal is already we're 80% there. So anybody who's interested in supporting that campaign, use the link that is in the chat. So again, to give a bit of context, I wanted to do this live to give the opportunity to people to ask questions to Evan about the Moxy Portal that they're starting to develop. So the Moxy Portal is going to be a web app or a web platform, a web portal, an app, a mobile app, and a data cloud as well. And those are going to enable us to use the Moxie in a more user-friendly manner, look at the data, interpret the data, stream data live as well. So we'll go into all the details in just a second. Full disclosure, I'm not currently affiliated with Moxie. I'm just a user. I'm just a guy who really loves the tech. And so if I can provide some of my platform to make sure that message gets heard loud and clear, I'm going to try and do that. So hence why we're here today. Evan, thanks so much for joining us, man. It's good to have you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to catch up with you.
Yeah, so maybe to give a little bit of a primer to this conversation, if you could talk about the project as a whole and how you're contributing to it currently, and then we can probably jump pretty quickly into Q&A with everybody who's interested in asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been using the Moxie for about 6 years or so now. And for those not familiar, the Moxie is a piece of hardware. It's a NIRS device. So it uses near-infrared spectroscopy, which is a certain wavelength of light to allow you to measure changes in blood volume in live time and allow you to look at an athlete's muscle oxygen saturation levels. And Sean's got a nice evolved Moxie monitor in his hand. Up until this point, all the softwares that are currently available that allow you to stream Moxie data are third-party platforms. So the most popular ones are PeriPedal, Perf Pro, Golden Cheetah, VO2 Master, and Pinelli also has integrations. And this has been great because it gives us a lot of options to stream this data, but none of these software solutions have been explicitly made for the Moxie monitor. So none of them support all the features that we want to use as coaches and athletes that are Moxie users. So what we're trying to do with this Moxy Portal and app is create the first native Moxie software that has all of the features that we want to use that allow us to easily capture data on the fly on a mobile device like an Android or an iPhone, which isn't currently an option, as well as to analyze this data on the back end on an online web tool. Which is all using Moxie for as long as I have, I've had to figure out kind of like weird laptop. I'll code a spreadsheet to analyze my data, and the whole process just takes time. And that's become a hurdle for a lot of users that want to start using a Moxie. So we want to lower that barrier to entry. So someone could buy the device, they could get the app for their iPhone or Android, they could get the web tool, and they could easily stream data, they could easily analyze data, and we remove a lot of those barriers that have been stopping people from using Moxie up to this point.
Yeah, I think it's really a great step forward because, like you said, right now it's a little bit of a kind of DIY guying the thing. I'm personally using the VO2 Master Manager app, which works quite well to see the data in real time. And then if you export the report, you have the SMO2 and the THB graph that are aggregated, which is nice. But then if you want a heart rate on top, you need to then export the CSV and then, like you said, kind of play with the spreadsheet on the side, which still works. But again, it's just extra steps, extra friction. And as if we can go towards removing as much friction as possible, I think we'll go forward a lot quicker, and more people will be inclined to adopt the technology. So again, for those watching, make sure you take a screenshot, make sure you share this on social media, make sure everybody knows what you're watching, and try to get people to join. If you know other people that might be interested, send them the link directly. Again, ask your questions in the chat, say a little hello if you don't have any specific questions. We have Dan Jackson, who already had a question for us. So what I'm going to do is jump out, let him jump in, ask his question. And Dan, you'll be fine. I saw you grin there a little second. And then that way he can ask his first questions. And then again, if you guys have questions, I'll check the Instagram chat in a second. And then we can go forward with more questions. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Oh, hey, Evan.
Hi, Dan.
My end, it went kind of nuts.
No worries.
So sorry about that. So with the advances with with NIRS specifically, and like with Moxie, do you feel that being able to identify like present time or current time limitations are going to be greatly impacted positively with sport performance, even just general health, of being able to identify like where there's some issues, like even in the regards of the controversial neurotransmission failure potentially?
Yeah, so are you asking on like individual level, or if we're looking at like the field at large, what kinds of changes we're going to see there?
Probably the field at large, honestly, because I know that, I mean, you know that I'm on board with this stuff quite a bit. That's, you know, as we've talked before, that's what I'm hoping to use this stuff for my dissertation in, you know, who knows, a decade. But the field as a whole, because I feel there's such a potential with measuring or being able to utilize near software equipment to really just kind of explode the performance world and be able to truly identify, well, let's put quotes around truly, you know, limiters, like actual limiters, where, because, you know, lactate buildup's responsible for muscle fatigue, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Like anything that we know in science, we're always limited by what we can measure. So I know you mentioned lactate. Like when I first started running and I was competing, that's all that we used for testing and analysis.
Of course.
And even using Moxie and trying to correlate that with lactate values, you see that there's a little bit of a disconnect. And I think with something like lactate, what most people don't appreciate is that there's a time lag from when lactate is produced in a muscle to when it's circulated to the site that you're actually testing.
Right.
So that in and of itself creates problems. And we're talking
Right.
about the neuromuscular system. We're trying to get to a local muscle. I think Moxie or NIRS is really
Hey
going to change
guys,
the game there.
sorry to cut you off, Evan. Do you have, by any chance, a pair of headphones that you could plug into the computer? That way, you'll hear the sound directly. Sorry, it's just echoing on the Instagram side.
Yeah.
If you have any headphones, that way the sound is not going to double up, and we won't have that echo. Sorry again, guys, for the echo on the Instagram feed. We're trying to fix that right now. I'll jump back out, Evan, while you try to fix that. Let me know if we're all good.
That should be better, maybe.
You hear it, and there shouldn't be any more sound coming out of your computer, which was the issue. Guys, Cass, thanks so much for joining the live here on Instagram. If the sound is better now on Evan's side, if you could just give us a little thumbs up, that'd be great. Guys, I'll let you resume. Sorry for cutting you off, Evan. Go ahead.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the muscle specifically, even something like EMG, which has typically been the gold standard, has its own issues.
Yeah.
For example, if we're looking at a left to right side, and we see one side, the amplitude on an SEMG is going to be lower. Initially, people would assume, oh, there is reduced neuromuscular activity, but even looking at a Moxie allows you to see that that's not always the case. Right. So, for example, we might see that there's poor perfusion in a tissue, and there's reduced blood flow to that tissue and reduced muscle oxygenation. And if we were to layer in something like thermography as well, we might see that there's a hypothermic region in that tissue indicating lower metabolic activity, and that's not going to get picked up with something like SEMG. Something like thermography could flag that issue is present, but it still doesn't really tell us what's happening within the muscle. Right. So in my opinion, NIRS is the first thing that really allows us to zoom in there. And it doesn't mean that we're going to throw out all the exercise science literature we have from the past few decades, but it does help us recontextualize some of these old concepts, or concepts that we never really had good scientific justification, like the critical power model. It's something that we know works. It's been used to model performance. There's literally thousands of papers showing it's accurate, but there's never really been a good mechanistic justification for it. And now you're starting to see a lot of people approaching that topic differently, where they're looking at it through the lens of NIRS, and they're seeing how critical power and W prime, which is the amount of work that could be done above critical power, you could actually get surrogates for these with a Moxie monitor with a NIRS device. So I think it's just allowing us to take a more broad view. Looks like there's some.
Yeah, there's some other ones. I don't want to take up too much. I do have some other questions, so I'll let you answer this. I mean, we'll obviously have some time to converse more. I want to give other people opportunity, but that's a wonderful starting point, honestly, to because it kind of follows that route, and a lot of it will lead to eventually like the we'll just put waterproof capabilities for water-based athletes, like swimming, water polo, even shoot triathletes and so on and so forth, kind of. But I'll let you. Thank you very much for that time, Evan. I'm not going to monopolize it all, so let the next person ask. I appreciate you, buddy. I'll be here later.
Later, man. Take it easy.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was great to have you on to ask a question, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right, so we're back with Evan, and we had a few questions pop up on Instagram. So I'm going to go through the questions. Guys and gals, for everybody listening, if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. That way I'll scroll back and find them and ask them to Evan. If you are on YouTube or on Facebook, you can post your questions in the chat directly there as well. I'll pick them up and ask them to Evan. So Ev, I had a few questions backed up from earlier today. The first one was from Leo, whom I spoke to earlier about the Moxie. He was asking if once the app and the platform are available, is the raw data still going to be accessible to end users? Are you still going to be able to just download CSV from the unit directly without going through the app and the portal? That was one of the questions, so I'll let you go on that one.
Yeah, so downloading it off the Moxie unit specifically, from my understanding, that still will be possible. I'd have to double check that with Roger, but I also know any data that does go to the portal, which will get streamed automatically, you will be able to export that as a raw file, like a CSV file or a FIT file. And that's an important feature because any researchers that want to use Moxie, they use CSVs for almost everything. So we need to retain that capability.
Yeah, I think it's important. And just like I spoke about with Leo earlier, still giving that easy access to the data, even for people who might not want to use or can't use the portal and the app. That's probably a great thing to have. Next question from my good friend Jonathan Ward, asking, if that's I guess that's more of a practical question with NIRS, but I'll throw it in there anyway. So if you have asymmetrical desaturation trends between a left and a right leg on a rower, let's say, what should be done to reestablish that balance? Maybe if we could just spend a quick 60 seconds on that, and then get back to the portal questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a wormhole. For one, we need to know when we're doing this workout, what is the expected response that we're looking for? because we need to determine which of those legs is the problematic one. If someone has unilateral discrepancies, typically one of those legs is going to be achieving the expected response. The other leg is not going to be getting that expected response. So for example, if I'm working at 70% of a max sprint speed on the rower, that's going to be creating a lot of tension. I might be expecting some degree of venous occlusion. So I might be seeing that on my right leg, some venous occlusion, some nice desat. And on my left leg, I might see like a mild compression reaction. I'm just not desaturating that much on the left side. To start, we know that's not a extraction issue from a left shift in the dissociation curve, because we would see that reflected on both sides. So we have to assume that that's going to be due to either poor metabolic activity in that tissue, sub-recruitment of that tissue, or poor perfusion. So now we need to try and parse out, well, if this left leg is underworking, obviously if you're on a rower and you're on a slide, you're not rowing crooked. So some other muscles are compensating to propel him through that slide. So trying to figure out, well, why is the muscle that we think should be the primary working muscle, why isn't that working? And this is a case where just popping the Moxie on, it's not going to give us the answer to that question, but it tells us that that's a question we should be answering. So then we need to play detective and we could parse that out. There are things that you could look into, like assuming he is able to modify the workout, we could do like an arterial occlusion test on both legs and see if there's any difference in rate of desaturation between sides when you block oxygen delivery and block blood flow. If he doesn't have access to a pneumatic cuff to do that, you could also do like an isometric calibration test where he could put the Moxie on like a vastus lateralis and just flex the quad as hard as he can for 20 to 30 seconds and look at side-to-side discrepancies. So there's a lot of potential options for ways that you can parse out what the underlying cause is, and there's a lot of different reasons that that can be happening. So I think that would be where I would push someone. You said he's your buddy, so if you want, we could connect afterwards and I could send him some info on that and we could follow up.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let's do that. That way we can get back to the portal questions. We had a couple questions that were in the same lane, so I'll just bunch them together from Yan and from Coach Cass as well. Thanks, guys, for watching that and asking some questions. Will the platform include heart rate as well? What are the data can we get into the app, and how many monitors is it gonna support?
Yeah, so you will be able to get heart rate data. So when you're collecting data on the iPhone or the Android, it's going to be through a Bluetooth connection. I believe it's either 4 or 5 Moxies that you could stream data from simultaneously. The specifics for that are on the Kickstarter page, so it will explicitly say how many Moxies you could stream from, and you can stream heart rate data as well.
Okay, cool. Is it going to be, you said once you have the data on the portal, you'll still be able to export that to CSV or another type of file if you want to re-upload it somewhere else? I'm thinking, I know Pinoe allows you to upload some Moxie data in there to do further analysis of their data. And there's probably other platforms now that start to integrate those kind of things. And that's still going to be possible with the app and the portal, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, next question. Again, for everybody listening, who just jumped in, make sure you ask your questions directly in the chat. I'll pick them up and ask Evan. Again, those on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or on Periscope, ask your questions directly in the chat. Evan will see them as well. So we have Matt. Thanks, Matt, for asking a question on Instagram here. How will the app and portal interface after a session? Does it upload and analyze automatically? What analysis does it provide?
Right. Would you mind repeating that one?
Yeah, sure, man. So maybe start with the first part. So how will the app and portal interface after a session? Does it upload and analyze automatically? And we can keep the last part of the question for after you answer that.
Yeah, so 2 parts. So as you're actually streaming the data on the app, the data will be pushed to the cloud in live time. So this is actually one of the features that I'm most excited about. Let's say Sean gives me access to his data because we're buddies and he wants me to watch him row for some reason. Sean could be collecting data at his house. He's streaming it to the app on his phone, and I'm going to be seeing the data come up on the portal on my side if he's allowed me to have access. And then subsequently, if you're recording your own data on your phone, your data will be pushed to the cloud in your portal. So as soon as you finish your workout, if you want to hop on the portal and review your data, it's all going to be there for you so you could analyze it.
Cool. And then the second part of the question, what analysis does it provide? And I guess maybe you can talk about what it's going to provide in terms of features off the bat, and then maybe what features you guys want to add on at later stages of the development of the app and portal as well.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the ones that we're going to have off the bat, there's going to be a slope calculator. So essentially, this is going to allow you to do, off the bat, you'll be able to see total hemoglobin and SMO2. Those are two measurements that Moxie users are already familiar with. But there's another measurement that you could use by calculating the slope called delta SMO2, and that just means the rate of change of SMO2. So this isn't something that's talked about as much, but I think there's a lot of potential applications for this, because delta SMO2 is going to represent the balance of oxygen supply and utilization. So for example, if I'm on a rower at a 150 pace and I'm pulling and my delta SMO2 is 0% per second, because it's a percent per second change, that means I'm at a steady state at that pace. But if I decide to drop my pace down to 143 and my delta SMO2 becomes very negative, -2% per second, that means my oxygen utilization is outstripping my oxygen supply. So this allows you to do some cool data analysis on the back end. And there's a lot of concepts. Anyone who backs a campaign, they'll also have access to the course on the Moxie Academy. There's a section on critical energetic rate testing, which is a way that you could model time to exhaustion in live time using a Moxie. And part of that concept is going to be doing these slope calculations. One of the other features that I think is pretty neat is if we do like a interval training session, you could chop up those intervals and overlay them over one another. So if you were to do 5 sets of a 500-meter row at a 150 pace with 2-minute rest, arbitrary workout, you could chop up those 500-meter row segments and stack them up over each other and see how the SMO2 responses compare. Obviously, you could do that right now visually, but it's much easier to analyze the data that way. And then a lot of the other features are just going to be like very practical things. You'll be able to draw on your data. So when it gets loaded to the portal, you'll have a pen tool that you could mark it up. You could circle things, draw arrows. You could highlight certain portions of the data. And this is something that I'm really excited about as a coach, because whenever my clients are sending me Moxie data, I'm uploading it into a spreadsheet, and then I'm graphing it, and then I'm putting it into Photoshop and marking it up. And it's a whole big process. This is going to make it very straightforward. And then obviously whoever sends you the data, you could just send them that picture that's marked up. So these are going to be some of the initial features. There are a few other things as well. And then as time goes on, we want to get feedback from people that are part of the community, if there are any tools that they think would be interesting, or if we start learning about new ways to analyze data. We do want to be able to add those things over time, but obviously that takes time, that takes money. So these are some of the initial features that we have right now.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the rate of change of SMO2 is something that's really interesting, and then from once you have that off the bat, and maybe even in the app in real time, you can set some parameters based on that as well, depending on desaturation rates. I had a question about that. So you said percent change per second. Is it a percent change per second on the 100% SMO2, or is it a percent change per second on the available bandwidth of SMO2 for that person in that specific situation, say from 82% max SMO2 down to 4% minimum SMO2?
So technically it will be a percent change per second calculated as slope. So it would be on a 0 to 100% scale. But this is where, if there's other ways that you want to analyze the data, because you'll still be able to export your files. If you have like a clever way of analyzing that you want to code into a spreadsheet, you'll still be able to pull that out and pop it into there and get that custom data analysis as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt on Instagram had another question. Again, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat so that I can relate them back to Evan. So what limitations would there be for people who have the app but don't have access to the portal?
So those will be one and the same. When you're getting the app, you're getting a subscription to the portal. So it's all one thing: the app, the cloud, the web tool, online. Collectively, those three things are the Moxy portal. So there won't be anyone who's only able to collect data on their phone, and they won't be able to use the analysis tools. It's all one fixed package. Okay, cool. That it's all going to work together. I'm going to pull up Guglielmo's question, because that way you can read it directly, and then everybody who's watching the live on YouTube and Facebook can see the question. Oh, you know what? It's not even long enough. So maybe I'll read it out. I'll put it there and I'll read it out. How about that? Critical power model open in my mind a lot of ideas to analyze, like good or not thinking about
how much single subject kinetic chain can condition physiology or not. For example, an athlete capable of high intensity performance with a, I believe you meant to say lumbar scoliosis here. Let me just go down here. The condition is hip range of motion with a low range of motion than the other hip. Is it a possible mechanical limitation factor for physiological limiting factor? What do you think? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so this is gets into really interesting concepts, and this is where I think critical power has some limitations, and why I like this idea of a critical energetic rate and a critical power model. One of the things that we have some data on is we've taken athletes with unilateral injuries. So these are kind of those athletes that was it Jonathan Ward asked about earlier, where they have asymmetries between desaturation side to side. So we have data from those athletes where we'll have them do a critical power test. And that's the power duration curve to model out their performance mathematically. And we'll also have them do a critical energetic rate calculation. But when we establish the critical energetic rate, it's very similar to critical power, but it's a rate of change of oxygen, so a delta SMO2 duration curve. We'll establish that separately on both legs. And we see two different populations of people come up. For both of these populations, critical power accurately predicts time to exhaustion on a fixed intensity. And we have a group that we call the compensators, which in these athletes, critical energetic rate on the non-injured leg predicts time to exhaustion, but critical energetic rate on the injured leg does not predict time to exhaustion. Then we have the athletes that we call the non-compensators. And for these individuals, critical power also predicts performance, but critical energetic rate on the injured leg predicts performance, and critical energetic rate on the non-injured leg doesn't predict performance. So coming back to Guglielmo's question, this is a case where critical power will still accurately predict this person's performance. But if they were to do like single leg cycling, for example, you might see it being different on each leg. So it's a non-physiologic variable that is impacting their ability to sustain a fixed power for a certain duration. So typically when we think about critical power, we're thinking of like the W prime value, and once W prime's depleted, task failure ensues. Well, technically in those individuals, the actual critical power from their left leg and their right leg might not be equal, and their W prime value might also not be equal between sides, because W prime is tightly linked to your ability to deliver oxygenated hemoglobin to a tissue. So if that's different between legs, depending on if you're a compensator or non-compensator, one of those legs will actually predict time to task failure. So in this example, the athlete, perhaps on both legs, their ability to deliver oxygenated blood to the working muscle will be impaired, but it's stemming from a movement issue, and it's not cardiac output that's limiting, or it's not nitric oxide being able to expand the blood vessels that's limiting them. So for each individual, if we use a combination of critical power and critical energetic rate, we can not only quantify their performance, but we could figure out why their performance isn't better. And then subsequently, how do we improve critical power? How do we create a greater critical energetic rate, or a greater W prime or an E prime, whatever terminology that you want to use?
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. Guglielmo, if you have a follow-up question, please put it down in the chat. Again, for those watching still, take a little screenshot, share the link, and make sure everybody knows that you guys are watching this and where people can watch it and follow it. Of course, the full recording is going to be available after the fact on both my Instagram account and on my YouTube channel as well. So for those who want to review all this, you'll be free to do that at length. Evan, I wanted to maybe ask a couple questions while I wait for other people to come in with questions. The first thing is, what do you foresee as being the biggest changes in your way to use Moxie once the portal is going to be available to you and all the other users?
Yes, I think one of the things that's going to be huge for me is just the range of scenarios that you could collect data. So for example, right now we're constrained to collecting data on a laptop. I know there is something like the VO2 Master app or the Pinelli app allow you to use an iPad or an iPhone. Those solutions work, but they're not always the most reliable. There's sometimes issues with signals dropping out and things like that. So what I'm excited about is to be able to, for example, go climbing, go bouldering in the woods. Obviously, I can't bring my laptop right now, so I'm not collecting any climbing data. This will make it really easy for me I could go hike out to where a boulder is, pop a Moxie on the forearms, pop a Moxie on a delt, and just start streaming data on my phone. So I'm excited about applications like that. This will also give us some extra applications for, like I have consulted with a coach that works with a lot of like motocross athletes. So they're racing on motorcycles and dirt bikes. And for them right now, it's like, okay, maybe you could like slip an iPad in like a backpack strap to them, which is a really sketchy solution. So if they could have like an iPhone like strapped to their leg or like strapped to a tricep, that will allow us to collect data on their forearms, because the vibration on the handlebars creates like a forearm pump limitation for a lot of these athletes. So I think it'll give us a lot of options like that for scenarios where we just can't really collect data very easily right now. I think the other big area is the ability to stream other athletes' data in live time remotely. So right now, if you or I, if we want to do physiologic testing on one of our clients, one, we're confined to our clients that actually live within a close enough proximity to us to be able to come in and get testing done, or we're confined to athletes that can maybe fly in on some occasion. But if I want to do a physiologic assessment with my athletes in Australia, I'm not going to fly 24 hours to test this guy. They're not going to fly 24 hours to get testing. But if they have a Moxie, they could just pop it on and I could have them stream their data in live time and I could do a physiologic assessment. And of course, people might say, well, why can't they just collect data on their own and send it to you? Obviously, they can do that, but this gives us some additional options for if I want to have them make adjustments to their breathing during the test. I could give them those cues and feedback in live time, and I could see how that's impacting their data. It will also allow us to do like personal training sessions with the Moxie for clients. So if I have a client overseas and we want to auto-regulate one of their workouts, I could be streaming their Moxie data and tell them, hey, you should push your pace a little bit on these 1K repeats. Okay, start your rest period. We're going to get you going in 30 seconds from now. And we could have a very fast and dynamic way of doing that.
Yeah, again, so kind of adding or removing barriers and friction when it comes to looking at other people's data, looking at your own data, and using that in a practical sense. Because I think from the conversations I've had recently, at least, a lot of people still think of the Moxie as just a testing tool and something you would use just like you would use say a Pnui or a VO2 Master to perform a test. But where I see the biggest possibilities for its use and application and utility is really on the field, is during sessions, to see in real time what is going on. Are the trends that we're seeing what we want to see from this session? We can really kind of determine if the outcome we're after is what we set it out to be by actually looking at the physiological data instead of just using it as a testing tool, which is why I was telling you before we started the live that right now I'm just trying to use it every single day, on myself, with my clients, and not necessarily doing everything by this, but just to better understand it and to just have more data to look at and understand. I had one question that came to mind, and that's from using the VO2 Master Manager app, which again is not made specifically for the Moxie, but it works right now. And that's probably a question for the software developers. So maybe you can relay that to them, or they can watch this and find that question for themselves. But one thing is that when you don't have the app open, the signal doesn't get picked up. So you need to always be on the app with the app open to get the data collected. And if you jump out to change the podcast you're listening to or something like that, you're going to lose the signal. It's going to come back. It's not like you drop it and you have to reset the Moxie. So it does come back, but then on the graph, you have a hole. You have a gap with no data. So I don't know if you have that answer. And if not, then that's definitely one for the software developers as well. But I think having the possibility to collect data through the app, on the app, in real time, whether you have the app open or not, or if it could be in the background, I think that would be a really good little feature to have.
Yes, that's not something I have a answer for you. I actually don't know the answer to that. That's something that we have to talk to Roger and talk to the software development team. But if that isn't something that's been considered, I think that is an important thing. So that's also why we have this forum open for people back in the campaign to ask these questions. If there are any things that were that we didn't think about while we were kind of working through the details, we'll be able to troubleshoot that. And then if that's a feature that a lot of people want and it's not something we already have, then hopefully that's something we could have included.
Yeah, exactly. For all the people that did already back the campaign or have a Moxie and are considering it, just so you know, when you join the campaign, when you back that up, you get access, like Evan said, to a private part of the Moxie forum, and you can make requests and ask specific questions about the development of this Moxie portal. Again, like you said, a good way to chip in, and everybody's got different practical situations and applications, so it's a great idea to relate that back up to Moxie so that they can hopefully make the best choices when it comes to adding features over time, so that everybody can benefit the most from it. We have a question on Instagram from our own Daniel Jackson. So I'll read it out, but I'll let you read it as well, Evan, just so that everybody hears it on the chat here as well. So with follow-up to Guglielmo, could the expressed mechanical factor potentially impact hemoglobin saturation in a trained athlete? Could that limiter be identified with NIRS?
So whether the mechanical factor could impact hemoglobin saturation specifically, so obviously it's going to impact blood flow and hemoglobin. Technically, a Moxie is measuring the density of oxygenated hemoglobin, oxygenated myoglobin, deoxygenated hemoglobin, deoxygenated myoglobin. Those mechanical factors will impact the total density of both hemoglobin and myoglobin in tissue. Whether it impacts the saturation will depend on what that factor is. So for example, if someone has a hyperthermic asymmetry, so it's a inflammatory based injury, that will impact the saturation. It's like we know from the binding curves, if you heat up a tissue, it's going to cause a right shift in the hemoglobin dissociation curve. That's going to cause oxygen to be released from hemoglobin more readily, so you'll see a quicker desat. If someone has that hypothermic asymmetry where they have poor perfusion in a tissue where there's a disruption in the normal fiber structure, that's going to lead to a left shift in the dissociation curve. So hemoglobin will increase its affinity for oxygen. You could almost think about like hemoglobin becomes sticky and it won't let go of that oxygen. So in that case, you'll see higher SMO2 saturation. So those are things that will impact it, but I don't know if that's explicitly what he was asking with that question, or if there's a different direction that he wanted to go with that. So if that didn't answer the question, feel free to follow up and I'll make sure to cover that more thoroughly. Close enough? Okay, sweet.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel, for the question. Again, anybody watching, if you guys have questions, now is the time to put it in the chat wherever you're watching from. I maybe wanted to talk, Evan, about for people who maybe are on the fence about jumping in and getting a Moxie or start using it. What do you see as the biggest potential for its application in the next, let's say, broad, like 5 to 10 years, as this technology evolved, as people better learn to understand what they can read and then how to use it and how to get some value out of it? What do you see happening in the industry with a tool like this in the next decade?
Yes, I think one of the biggest hurdles for this becoming more widespread and better understood right now is that a lot of the models that people are taught don't jive with what you'll find when you use a Moxie. So there's a very large disconnect between what people learn as exercise physiologists in an undergrad and what we know as Moxie users. So to start, I know we've talked about before, you pop on a Moxie and you start sprinting and you see oxygen utilized very rapidly. And well, if you crack open an exercise physiology textbook or you take an undergrad exercise course, you'll be taught, well, that's anaerobic galactic power into anaerobic power. Oxygen shouldn't be part of that energy transduction process. Obviously, we know that it is, thinking in more of like a contemporary lens. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. I think that starts from the bottom up. It's both the textbooks being updated, it's more accurate models being taught, but I think a lot of it is also the exercise science literature. So I read a lot of NIRS research, and I think even people who are NIRS researchers, there is some fault here. Like I read a systematic review recently where they took dozens and dozens of studies using, was just written as a NIRS device, and they were talking about the conflict between the measurements taken from NIRS devices and that this means NIRS is inaccurate. But if you actually look through the individual studies that they were using in the systematic review, some of them were using muscle oximeters, which measure SMO2. Some of them were using tissue oximeters or devices that measure tissue saturation index, which is STO2. They're not even measuring the same things in these studies, and they're lumping them all together in a systematic review. So I think the biggest thing for this to become more widespread is like the basic education changing, research that is done on NIRS being done with a little bit more, I don't know the proper word for this, would make it a little bit more rigorous. So having the data being presented, like show raw data for each individual, just don't show population averages, talk about what devices are being used and what those devices are measuring. And I think if we could change things from that perspective, then it will be easier to permeate the industry. Like I talk to a lot of professional sport teams. I know a lot of pro team coaches that use this technology. And they're definitely the outliers even within that industry. So if a lot of professional sport team coaches don't understand this technology, it's hard to expect the average athlete that might not have formal education in this field to understand it. I know when you started using Moxie as well, you went through a huge educational process, like just talking and having chats over the past 2 years. Like we've both done a ton of reading. We don't want people to have to do that, which is why we've created this course on the Moxie Academy, which we're hoping will bridge the gap as well. So I think a combination of making the education more accessible, making the technology easier to use, I think all of these things are going to have to happen. I'm going to quickly run and grab a charger from the other room so I don't
Go ahead.
rush out here.
Yeah, that sounds good. While I'm here, I'm not going to answer for Evan, but we have a question from Leo. Leo, thanks again for the chat we had earlier, buddy. Is there any way to get the Portal plus Course plus Moxie 5 sensor bottle from the Kickstarter in Switzerland? I believe that you can. I don't think the Kickstarter is restricted to any geographic location. I think you just have to go on the Kickstarter and see if you can have the sensor shipped to Switzerland. So that might be again a question for Evan to answer once he's got everything sorted out with battery life on the phone. Make sure that it doesn't die over there on Instagram. We're almost there, Evan. You got this.
Yep, I got it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's God, it's hard to prop up a phone when you have the charger sticking out the bottom of it. We'll make it work though.
There we go.
Right. So yeah, that's something I'm not positive about. I do know on the Kickstarter page, if there are any countries that there are issues shipping it to, it will say that on the Kickstarter campaign. But if you're not sure about that, there also is an FAQ button on the Kickstarter campaign that you could ask questions. So if that's something you're unsure about, just pop it in there. We're very responsive, so you should get a response back on there pretty quickly.
Okay, cool. And then we'll go down. Leo has a couple more questions, so I'll let you go on that one. What are the differences between BSX, Human, and Moxie 5?
Right. So quick overview. I'm not going to speak about BSX in particular because I haven't looked into the specs on a BSX in maybe 5 or 6 years. So I can't accurately recall that, but I can talk about the difference between a Moxie and a Human. So like we talked about, a Moxie is a muscle oximeter, and a Human technically measures what's called tissue saturation index. So I've used a handful of different NIRS devices, and really the fundamental difference is that when you're using a Moxie, the signal that you're collecting is from the muscle tissue specifically. So it's calibrated on a 0 to 100% scale. If you desaturate down to 50% on a Moxie, your muscle oxygenation is at 50%. With a Human, it takes a similar measurement. You are still getting SMO2, but a Human looks at tissue saturation index. So you're collecting a signal from the skin, the adipose tissue, and the muscle. And it amalgamates those three. So if you're at a Human, you might desaturate a muscle down to 50%, but on the Human, it might say 75% SMO2 because the muscle is only accounting for a certain portion of that signal, and you don't necessarily know what percentage of that signal is coming from muscle. So this is why I always tell people, or when Human still existed, that company obviously went bankrupt. But when it did exist, what I would tell people using Human is you can't look at the numbers at face value. You could only look at the trends. So you could see if when you transition from a sustainable to an unsustainable intensity, if you desaturate the muscle more and you fail at 60% SMO2, it doesn't necessarily mean you have utilization limitation, because you don't really know if yet your muscle's at 60% saturation, or if on a Moxie you can take that at face value. So that's going to be the biggest difference. There's some other nuances in the algorithms and the calibration, and Human, you get skewed data based on where you put it on your body because the fat thickness is different. Also, temperature changes of the skin impact a Human as well. So there's a lot of nuances.
Maybe to piggyback on that question, because it might be from where it comes from, on the Kickstarter page, I think there's obviously different backing options, and there's ones where you can trade in an old unit for a new unit. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, so if you own a Human or BSX, one of the options on the Kickstarter, for example, if you didn't own a Human or BSX and you want to go for the highest tier and get a Moxie, it would be $800 on the Kickstarter. If you trade in a Human or a BSX, it brings the price down quite a bit for you. So you're essentially trading those in for like a rebate off of the Moxie.
Right, just so that's clear for everybody. Leo also asked what the difference is between a Moxie 3 and a Moxie 5. Maybe you can address that.
Yeah, major difference is a Moxie 3 doesn't have a Bluetooth connection, so Moxie 3 only has ANT. So if you want to use the Moxie app, you need a Moxie 5 because that is the only one that's Bluetooth compatible. So that is an option on the Kickstarter as well. If anyone's a Moxie 3 owner, that's not going to work for the Moxie app, unfortunately, but you can trade your Moxie 3 in and get a Moxie 5 in return for a discounted price as well.
Mm-hmm. And then the price, somebody asked about the price. The 3, I guess, is the 3 still available for sale? I guess. Yeah. I'm not sure.
As far as I'm aware, you can't still buy a Moxie 3 sensor.
Right. So for those who want a Moxie 5, you can head to the Kickstarter page because the price is obviously going to be better there than on the Moxie store, online store. But you can go check that out as well if you want details on the price. That way we're not going to say anything that we don't know exactly. If you guys have some more questions, we're going to be here for another 5 to 10 minutes. So make sure you drop your last questions in the chat. Evan, I wanted to ask you, so once we get past that barrier to entry when it comes to education, the models that are used, and the accessibility of that information for people, where do you see the Moxie being used the most in the next 5 to 10 years? What's its applications? It's a very broad question. We can go down many rabbit holes, but if you could give a good overview of all the different ways that the Moxie can currently be used, and that you see it being used in coming years with the development of the technology, understanding of the data, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, so right now there are a few big picture areas that I see it used. Initially, when people started using Moxie, it was primarily for assessments. When I got a Moxie 6 years ago, that's really how you saw it used, and you'd also see it used for auto-regulating endurance training as well. Since then, using Moxie for strength and hypertrophy training has been more popular, so that's another application. But outside of the testing and training realm, if we were to step out of that completely, the rehab setting is another big one, and so is mathematically modeling performance, so using it to predict time to exhaustion, using it to pace. All of those are potential applications. In terms of which one of those I think is going to be the biggest, that's really going to be dictated by the people using Moxie. I talk to people that are PTs that work with sport teams, and the only thing they use Moxie for is load management and return to play. I talk to endurance coaches, and they entirely use it for assessments and auto-regulating endurance training. If you look at a company like N1 Training and Education, I think I saw Cassim here earlier, they use it for exercise selection, which is a use that I haven't seen many people use it for. So they're using exercise selection, research, auto-regulating strength and hypertrophy training. So I think you're going to see these pockets of Moxie users that all have their niche applications. And you'll see each of those kind of form their own communities, where right now, because the total number of Moxie users isn't so great, we're all kind of lumped into the same category, and we kind of it's like a valence cloud where we all have some overlapping interests, but we all have our own little niches and nuances. And I think you're going to see that spreading out more and more over time, and bigger pockets forming. And I think there's probably applications that I've never even thought of. The other day I got contacted by a guy who wants to use the Moxie on racehorses and asked me if that's something that's possible. And I have no idea if that's possible, but
It's amazing.
if it is, someone's clearly going to try it, and we'll see that popping up maybe as well.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And like you said, there's so many different ways to use it, and it's really up to some point, it's up to the coach to think about, okay, what could I measure? Why would it help me? And then how can I use the information to inform my current or future decision making? I think, which is interesting because again, you can really use it in many different ways, and there's probably, like you said, many areas that we haven't even thought about yet. So the more people use it, the more ideas we'll get around it. Maybe to finish off, since we don't have any last standing questions here in the chat, to finish off, maybe for those who just got one or who are going to get a Moxie through this campaign, what is usually your advice for first-time Moxie users?
So my advice is to not make decisions based off the data initially. Just observe the data to start. So a lot of times you'll get coaches who have been successful. They've gotten athletes bigger, stronger, faster, and they start collecting Moxie data, and they have this like existential crisis. They're like, I don't know anything anymore. I don't know what anything means. And you're like, dude, like chill. Have you ever gotten someone bigger? Have you ever gotten someone's 1 rep max up? And they're like, oh yeah, I've done that plenty of times. Okay, cool. So when you first start collecting Moxie data, before you're fluent in it, Moxie's like learning another language. So if you don't know how to perfectly speak the language, that's fine. Just train as you would based off of performance metrics and see how that data unfolds over days or weeks, and see if you could spot trends. And then take the course. Anyone who backs the campaign will have access to a course that has 10 hours of footage on it. So take that as well and start performing tests and see if you could spot trends and identify them in the tests. We'll have access to a form. So if you have questions, you can send them to me or Andre, and we can help you guys out. Philip will be in there as well. We'll answer you guys' questions. And the biggest thing is a lot of times people start collecting data and they'll get some textbook cases when they run a physiologic assessment. So it's like if they know certain phrases in a language, they could go to a restaurant and ask for a pizza or ask where the bathroom is, but then the waiter responds and they have no idea what they said and they start freaking out. It's kind of similar. You'll see some textbook cases when you're collecting data, and then you'll feel really confident. Then you'll put one of your other athletes through an assessment, and the trends will look absolutely insane, and you'll have no idea what you're looking at. And a lot of coaches start to freak out because they're like, oh, I thought I understood Moxie, I understood this language, and I actually have no idea what's going on. And that's an opportunity to dig into the physiology a little bit more, because Moxie's not lying to you. If the data is coming up, there's a reason for that. So that's where you could start to parse it out. I usually recommend start with one sensor over time if you want to add a second one to get granularity. I know something that you've done a lot and you've posted some really good videos on. So if people haven't watched, they should. You've talked about spirometry and how that could be used to parse things out. Obviously, listen to the Upside Strength podcast because there's a ton of good information as well.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
Back your way. So I think it's just a constant process of learning. That's what's really fun about Moxie. I've been using it for 6 years and I learn things every week. I'm constantly finding new applications. I'm constantly reading research and getting new ideas to try out on clients and have them send me data. So I think it's just having an open mind and being willing to play with it and know that you're not going to be an expert, because no one's a world-class expert on it right now. That's what makes it so enjoyable. So I think just having an open mind with it, having fun with it, and don't getting too stressed out when you see something insane and you don't know what it means.
Yeah, I can definitely I could definitely testify to that. The overwhelmed feeling when I had to let go of all my prior understanding of bioenergetics and then how it actually looks now, which at the end of the day, in my opinion, with the Moxie, it's good to know, but you don't need to know and understand this to be proficient using the Moxie. It's obviously better if you understand the underlying mechanisms, theoretical mechanisms that we've been able to measure up until now. But at the same time, if you just stick on a bit more of a surface level with the Moxie data, you can still get a lot of stuff out of it without necessarily understanding everything that's going on at the cellular level per se. And then to your point again on just trying to use it and having fun with it. I got in about probably 7 months ago, and I only recently started to like Brian Kozak would say a little shout out to him. Like Brian Kozak would say, just play, right? Just play with it. Just try things. It's just ideas. So just put it on every day. Try different things. See what comes up. See if it makes sense, and if it doesn't, try to dig into as to why. But really, the practical aspect of it. Once you get well versed with it, putting a Moxie on is not like being in the lab and setting up a VO2 test. Putting a Moxie on is like putting a pulse, it's putting like a heart rate belt on. It's a 1 minute thing, and so you can really do it in every situation and try to understand why and how and then what you can get out of it. But definitely getting over the overwhelm factor is a big one at the start of it, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they do think like, oh, Moxie, it's this crazy technology, but I think people fail to appreciate like every technology has had its time where it's the crazy new technology. I've talked to physiologists who are kind of doing their thing in like the 80s, and there's this crazy new technology that came out then. It was called heart rate monitoring, and no one knew how to use it. There were so many detractors who were like, heart rate monitoring, that's way too complicated. No one's ever going to understand that. So like, don't stick this thing to your chest. Like, that's insane. It's for professional athletes. Now everyone knows how to use a heart rate monitor. Most people can interpret very easily. They understand zoning to some degree. And it's just a matter of that permeating the industry. So I think with Moxie, it's a chance to get in on the ground level of that. And it might seem really complicated initially, but everything seems really complicated initially at some point. When you first start doing CrossFit, there's 50 movements that you need to know the names of. And you're like, did I just do a thruster? Was that a power snatch? Or am I like, is that a jerk? But eventually you learn it and you pick up on the language and the lingo and you get a hang of it. And Moxie is very much the same way. It seems daunting at first, but you don't need to understand the molecular biology and physiology. If you want to be a surface level user, you could just learn to see like, oh, this is how you spot a expiratory muscle limitation. Like, this is what the THB trends look like. And you don't need to know anything past that. You don't need to know that it's because carbon dioxide is building up and CO2 is a vasodilator. But the good thing is, if you do want to learn that information's there for you as well. So you could also let it meet you where you are, and maybe that gets you hooked on physiology and you end up finding something that you really dig and want to learn more about that you didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, I think that was a great way to kick things off, and I'm glad to see the campaign going so well. Again, for those who are interested, in the chat, in the comments, you'll find the link to the Kickstarter campaign. I think there's another 11 days to jump in for those who are interested.
Yeah, I think it's maybe 11, 12 days.
Yeah, I think I read recently that it was up to the 27th of February. So being the 16th, that would be about that. Evan, any closing words for us today?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything I want to chat about. And of course, if anyone thinks of a question an hour or two from now, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to field questions. And hopefully let's hit this goal. I'd love to see this made.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Evan. And thanks so much to everybody who watched today, whether it's on Instagram over here, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch. Thanks again to everybody for contributing, even just tuning in, asking questions. It's always a pleasure to interact with everybody. I also hope that this project gets through, and that's going to be a big step forward for everyone in the field. Again, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys at another time. Take care, Evan.
Yeah, thanks again, Sean.